Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you as we continue this conversation about Israel, Iran, and the United States. We've always known that the United States was involved. We know that, but now it's public. And one has to wonder, where will all of this go? Are we on the verge of World War III? Given the strategic partnership that Iran has with Russia. Now, mind you, Russia also has a relationship with Israel, but they have a strategic partnership that they signed last January with Russia. How is this going to play out? Iran is now one of the BRICS nations. How will this play out? What is going on and what really happened, everybody? And if the United States and Israel have been so successful in gutting Iran, why did Israel need the United States' help? Well, you know what? I believe in bringing some of the most brilliant minds that exist to you. And of course, we have this gentleman. I cannot believe Dr. Stephen Junas is back in the United States. Oh, my goodness. But he was always so generous in speaking to us while he's been overseas. But I'm glad that you are here. Of course, from the University of San Francisco, as my father calls him, this great freedom fighter. That's right. And my father sends his best regards to you.
Um, and
And
best to him, please.
well, of course, you all have done some work together down through the years, professor of politics at the University of San Francisco, that great university. And of course, you are head of the Middle Eastern Studies program. And so I need you to talk to me and help us to understand what we're looking at. Many of us don't know where Iran is really. We don't understand Iran's strategic importance geopolitically. Um, and I just don't I'm wondering if sometimes I think that, hubris helps you to overestimate yourself and underestimate everyone else, Dr. Eunice.
Yeah.
And so I would, I'm, I just find it very hard to, to underestimate the power of the country that is over the Strait of Hormuz.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't even know if we really understand just how consequential that body and those other bodies of water are to us and how much control they have over that part of the world. So let me get your reaction to what happened last night. But before I do, I want everyone to go to Blue Sky. Santita Jackson, am on Blue Sky, Santita dot bsky dot social, Santita Jackson dot bsky dot social. I'm on Facebook, Facebook.com/ Santita Jackson and Friends. Santita Jackson and Friends. I'm on X at Santita J. And of course, I'm here on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So, Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe and share. Dr. Junas, welcome back to the United States. Happy 4th of July. Happy Juneteenth. We've got a lot going on. What was your first reaction to last night's announcement that the
Pretty,
United States had formally entered into this fray?
yeah, pretty horrified actually. I was hoping that perhaps Trump was just bluffing. I was thought perhaps that he would be concerned about his MAGA base that is pretty anti-interventionist, that he wouldn't go through with it. Yet, I think there's been a myth that Trump is anti-war. He's anti other people's wars, but he's quite willing to go to war himself. And unlike previous presidents, doesn't even pretend that he supports or cares about international law. I mean, other presidents have done verbal gymnastics to try to claim what they were doing was legal. That Trump doesn't care. um, and of course, not just illegal in terms of international law, UN Charter and all that, but of course, U.S. Constitution. Offensive wars, you got to go through the Congress, and even the War Powers Act, you're supposed to at least consult with Congress first, and he didn't do either of those things, and so it's just sort of the pattern of his outlaw behavior, only on an international scene with potentially a pretty serious consequences. And just to talk a little bit about his base. He won the Republican nomination back in 2016. A lot of people didn't expect him because he was able to make the case that unlike Jeb Bush and all these Republican hawks who supported the Iraq War, he was going to bring the troops home. Yeah, he wasn't going to get us involved in these endless Middle East conflicts. America first, that kind of thing. And then he defeated Clinton on the same line. Because remember, Hillary Clinton was pretty darn hawkish herself, big supporter of the Iraq War and the like. And he actually ran to her left on foreign policy. In fact, I looked at some of the statistics about people who went from white working class voters in the northern tier swing states that went from Obama in 2008 and 2012 to Trump in 2016. It parallels almost exactly the areas where they had the highest casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, even factoring in for other things. He was able to convince white working class voters who traditionally voted Democratic to go Republican because it was their sons and daughters that were being sent over to these endless wars. And even though Kamala Harris wasn't nearly as hawkish, he was able to say, "Oh, the Democrats take you to these wars. I'm the peace candidate." He was saying that here in Michigan, actually, during the final days of the campaign. But of course, he breaks his promises, campaign promises, all over the place. So I guess it's not surprising that he broke this one as well.
Dr. Eunice, he did appeal to those who had lost someone, or who had loved ones returned to them from these wars, profoundly injured, whether it was a mental or emotional injury or a physical injury, with a VA that is not adequately staffed. The VA, they work very, very hard. They don't have the resources to do the work that they need to do. Because the injuries that used to kill people, you can live with them now.
Yeah.
But it's very, very hard to live with them. So when you look at what was striking to me about the press conference last night, well, not the press conference, the announcement, it was they were taking a victory lap.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think this is very soon. We don't really know what happened here. I know what you told me, but I don't know what you've done. I don't know what you've struck. And I do know that, okay, so if you did do damage to Iran, Dr. Eunice, there are the ways that they can get us.
Mm-hmm.
Help me to understand. Help the audience to understand, because I don't. They don't have to drop a bomb. They can shut the strait.
Yeah. His announcement was so facile, and less than 4 minutes. I mean, yeah. At least I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's like. And public opinion is very much against this, and he really didn't seem to try to win it over. I mean, I was just joking to a colleague that America's been so deindustrialized now we don't even bother to manufacture consent. And, I mean, it's like he basically says, okay, boom, 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 we're done, but that's not how it's going to work now. Iran's, missile defense systems and other missile systems, other things have been damaged, by 9 days of Israeli bombardment. There's some question on how much they can retaliate, how effective. Perhaps there's even a back channel deal that maybe we didn't do as much damage as we said, and we warned the Iranians beforehand, and in return they're not retaliating, so there can be win-win situation. I know there could be other scenarios, but my hunch is that they are going to retaliate. We have nearly 40,000 troops, within just a couple hundred miles of Iran's borders. We have the Navy in the Gulf. They're well within range of Iranian missiles and drones. There are these pro-Iranian militia, these proxy armed groups in Iraq that could attack our bases there. And they could try to close the Strait of Hormuz. And even if they weren't successful, if you're an insurer, you're not going to let a tanker go through in a possible war zone. So obviously, the impact on gas prices, indeed the global economy, could be fairly extensive. So, this is not over. And I mean, kind of maybe look back on his talk here, his little mini speech last night, as the equivalent of Bush's mission accomplished speech on the aircraft carrier. And and I think it also and it also is going to underscore greater resentment. Now, Iran doesn't have a lot of friends in that part of the world because of their intervention, support for Assad and other groups, and indeed they're not very popular at home. But the Iranians have a strong sense of nationalism. I mean, they've been a major power on and off for 2,500 years, and for us to treat them like they're some kind of little banana republic, that we can jerk around. But they're a nation of 90 million people. They're about the size of Western Europe, and anybody and any of your listeners who know anybody of Persian background know they're pretty darn proud of their heritage and things like that. And I know quite a few Iranian dissidents. I've been to Iran. I talked to I know a lot of Iranian Americans, and they're very proud of their country and they hate the government by and large, but they realize that Iran's being mistreated. I mean, how come Israel can have nuclear weapons, Pakistan can have nuclear weapons, India have nuclear weapons, and Iran can't even have a civilian nuclear program that might have the potential down the road of going off to a military direction? And this is not about nuclear weapons. This is not about protecting Israel, because if we really were concerned about them developing a nuclear weapon, we wouldn't have pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which would have made it physically impossible for them to do so. So when you hear all these politicians, including a fair number of Democrats, unfortunately, defending what Israel's done or what Trump's done, and says we can't allow them to have a nuclear weapon. Well, if that was your concern, why did you say go back to the Iran nuclear deal if you don't want them to have it? Because that's going to guarantee they won't have it, because it'll be physically impossible, and the inspections regime is the most thorough in U.S. history. No way they could cheat. Whereas if you bombed them, even if you did a fair amount of damage, I'm sure they've done some damage, though probably not as much as Trump is claiming. They're going to be able to rebuild it, and perhaps they'll rebuild it, in a Manhattan Project style all-out effort, and maybe they will go nuclear. Because guess what? They got a lesson here. Maybe you need a deterrent, because if you're an Iranian and you saw yourself listed as part of the axis of evil, remember Bush's line with them and Iraq and North Korea, and you saw that Iraq got rid of their nuclear program, brought in the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect, and they confirmed everything was gone. And while North Korea threw out the IAEA inspectors and started developing nuclear weapons, which government's still around and which one was overthrown? What lesson might you learn from that? Maybe you need a nuclear deterrent, because Iran's not going to have some suicidal strike against Israel, which has its own very strong nuclear deterrent. What we don't like is the prospect that Iran might have a nuclear deterrent, so the United States and Israel can't do whatever the hell they want to in the Middle East, as we've been doing for these past few decades. Because we got rid of Saddam, the Syrian people got rid of Assad. Who is left to challenge American hegemony? It's Iran. And when you think about how obsessed we've been with Cuba all these years, and with Sandinista Nicaragua in the 80s, because they dared stand up to U.S. imperialism, a country as important as Iran, with all that oil and everything else, we sure as hell do not want them to challenge our hegemony. So this is what I've been talking about in these past couple of days. That it's not about stopping them from it's not about stopping them from getting a nuke to, and it's not even about protecting Israel. It's about hegemony. It's about hegemony and their refusal to buckle under to U.S. prerogatives.
Expand that, please, because we've been hearing about the Greater Israel Project. I mean, now you've seen Syria's been taken down. Libya's been taken down. I mean, all of these governments around them have been taken down, and they're basically vassal states of the United States or of that country.
Or a total mess, like Syria's become, and that kind of thing. I mean, my point being, if you go back to the national security strategy of 2002 under the Bush administration, and that's when they talked about full spectrum dominance, this whole idea that not only are we going to resist the rise of any rival superpower like China, we don't even want a regional power that could get in the way of our prerogatives. Now, when it comes to Israel, I mean, what is Israel's important is, they are our surrogate. They, as Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, said just a few days ago, Israel is doing the dirty work for the West.
Hmm.
And
What did he mean by that?
well, basically, they're the ones who are bombing bombing Iran up to that point, and they also have been pulverizing Gaza, bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen. They I mean, I reject this idea as a tail wagging the dog. We're doing this for Israel. I mean, Netanyahu is quite happy to play along. I mean, it fits in with his agenda too, but it's very much part of using Israel as our surrogate, kind of like we used the Shah, ironically, back in the 1970s as our surrogate in the Persian Gulf, and so. And it's actually kind of a little ironic that a German chancellor would use the word dirty work in reference to Israel, because if you look at the history of anti-Semitism, the old ruling, going back to medieval Europe, and subsequently, you'd have the ruling class use certain Jews to do the dirty work, as in the money lenders, the tax collectors, that kind of thing. So when people would rise up against the oppression, they could say, "Oh, it's not us; it's the Jews that are doing it." And you have the pogroms and all that kind of stuff. And in certain ways, we're using Israel in a very, very, very similar way. They're, again, like I say, under that current government in particular, they're quite willing to take this on because they have their own agenda too.
I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're really that they are trying to do here, because I think that it seems like there's some missing pieces here. When I look at what the corporate media are giving us, Dr. Zubez, we're not getting the full story at all. Not that I ever really expected to, but it's so one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
We're not hearing about what's happening in Iran. We're not hearing about the strategic importance of Iran, their resources. We're not hearing about the BRICS relationship, the strategic partnership with Russia, and all of these pieces that are moving around. And also because I read international journals and papers, I'm hearing what people are saying that they're not reporting here. And I think that this is it an overreach to say that America is in a very vulnerable position?
Certainly in the longer term, because these kinds of actions create reactions. That already so much of the world is so angry at supporting our role in the genocidal war in Gaza, and this idea that we instead of supporting the non-proliferation under the non-proliferation treaty, under the idea that you deal with threats of more countries getting nuclear weapons by getting binding treaties that meet their security needs without them going nuclear, things like that. Instead, we oppose this kind of nuclear apartheid, where we say, Israel going to have nuclear weapons, but countries and even Pakistan and India, but not Iran, not those that challenge our hegemony. But it's sort of I mean, just to give one example, there's been a movement for years for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, similar to already existing nuclear weapons-free zones in Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, South Pacific, Antarctica. I mean, these have worked because they're based on this principle of equality. People will not get nuclear weapons if their neighbors aren't getting nuclear weapons. But and UN Security Council Resolution 487, which was put in right after the Gulf War back in 1991, that was the Iraq disarmament resolution. It included a clause, which you forget about now, that said Iraqi disarmament was the first stage towards regional-wide disarmament of weapons of mass destruction. And yet the U.S. has blocked, even though we justified making war on Iraq 12 years later after them allegedly not doing that, even though not disarming, even though they already had. We blocked enforcement of the resolution that says others have too. And the reason the U.S. has opposed a nuclear weapons-free zone, and this has been true in Democratic administrations as well, even Obama, he basically stonewalled, prevented the UN from meeting to talk about this. Because if we did have a nuclear weapons-free zone for the entire Middle East, Israel would have to get rid of its nuclear weapons, and the United States would be prohibited from bringing nuclear weapons into the region. Because when Israel hasn't officially acknowledged that it has nuclear weapons, but when they always answer, they say we will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons in the Middle East. That's true because it was the United States in 1958 during the Lebanese crisis that we brought nuclear weapons into the Middle East. We didn't use them, thankfully, but we did bring them in, fearing we might have some kind of showdown with the Soviets. So, yeah, this is again, this goes back, to this idea that is rejecting law-based principles of non-proliferation, for U.S.-backed nuclear apartheid.
U.S.-backed nuclear apartheid? You need to explain that one.
They're basically saying, we get to decide who the haves and have-nots are, who gets to have nuclear weapons and who doesn't.
Okay.
Instead of equality, we say, our privileged people get to have them, and the people we don't like doesn't have them. The problem is, of course, if you do impose a regime of haves and have-nots, it makes the have-nots want to become the haves.
Absolutely.
I mean, so it does not. It actually makes it more difficult to, if you want Iran to disarm, you should have stuck with the nuclear deal, even though it was one-sided unfair. But instead, by bombing and threatening and this kind of thing, it's just going to get them to really want to, because they haven't. Even if they did destroy practically everything tangible in terms of their nuclear program, they got science, and even though they killed some of the top scientists, they still got plenty of scientists who know how to do this stuff and how to acquire it. So this is not over. Well, people say, well, actually, the longer goal is regime change, and once we have a nice compliant government, they will. That's going to be okay. Well, again, even the Iranian government was ready to give up any hope of a nuclear weapon, and we broke that off as an excuse to go to war. But even in terms of regime change, now I know people very much who are very active in the pro-democracy movement in Iran. Again, they hate the regime. They want regime change, but they recognize that's only going to come from the bottom up. Because if you look at the dictatorships that have been overthrown in the past 40, 50 years, the vast majority have done through civil society, democratic organizations engaged in strategic nonviolent action. When you try to overthrow a dictator through foreign military intervention, like Iraq and Libya, you end up with a big mess. But because Iran is being bombed, when your country is being bombed, people rally around the flag. They are less likely to rise up against the regime. Again, the Iranians are, they may hate the Ayatollahs, hate the Revolutionary Guard, but by golly, they're patriots, and they don't like seeing their country bombed and being treated so poorly, and not accepting diplomatic alternatives.
We're talking with Dr. Stevens Eunice of the University of San Francisco. Of course, he's an expert on Middle Eastern politics, and I need to understand what we're looking at, and I know that you do too, because I want to know why Iran is of such great consequence in this discussion. I mean, they keep coming up. Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has been bringing Iran. Iran has been in his crosshairs for decades.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, again, because they are the only ones that really, since Egypt, signed the peace agreement at Camp David way back in the late 70s, Iran is the only really country that's big enough and has the resources to be, be a credible a challenge to them. And again, it's the same reason the U.S. Is doing this. Again, we would be targeting Iran even if Israel wasn't there, because remember, we overthrew their last democratic elected government way back in 1953, brought the Shah back into exile, supported his brutal secret police,
Mm-hmm.
and because he became our puppet, he became our regional gendarme, he was friendly with Israel, and he was a challenge to the Arab nationalists, and this kind of thing, and it was really great for us, except that he ended up being so effective through the Savak, the dreaded secret police. I mean, the U.S. literally brought in former German SS officers to train them. I mean, their torture and abuses were
What?
widespread. Yes, and but they
Trained
were
them to
still
do what?
hmm?
Trained them to do what?
Torture. I mean, the United States would literally. I noticed. I was back when I was working in the Institute for Policy Studies, way back in the early '80s, and I came across this thing where they were sending electric cattle prods to Iran. They don't raise cattle in Iran. They're just being used on human beings in the torture. And they've had these cylinders they'd put around the torture victims' heads. When they screamed, it would reverberate and break their eardrums. I mean, it was an incredibly repressive regime. So again, the U.S. saying, oh, we care about democracy in Iran. Well, sure as hell didn't care about it back then. But anyway, they were so effective, thanks to U.S. assistance, at oppressing the leftist, liberal, secular, and nationalist opposition. The one opposition they couldn't totally destroy were the mosque, where there was the Islamist opposition. They couldn't really get inside the mosque. Now, Iran is a Shia country, unlike the majority Sunnis. And the Sunni Islam is pretty egalitarian in structure. But in Shia Islam, they have a very strict hierarchy. The Ayatollahs are essentially the equivalent of cardinals in the Catholic Church. So like cardinals, the Ayatollahs, in addition to having say over the houses of worship, they also have hospitals, schools, social services, the kind you'd find in the Catholic diocese in the U.S. And so they had a social net, they had a network, that they can mobilize. And so when the Shah was finally overthrown, there was a power vacuum, and guess who filled it? It was the Ayatollahs. And that's why it took on this Islamist direction, not because the Iranians are super religious. In fact, they historically they haven't been, as compared to the Saudis and neighboring Muslim countries. But it was these clerics, in fact, a particularly reactionary brand of Islamic clerics, that ended up dominating. And then with the Iran-Iraq War, you had the rise of the Revolutionary Guard and these hardline militarists. I mean, in certain ways, Iran's almost as much a military dictatorship as it is a theocracy at this point. So again, you've gotten these really pretty nasty elements that are in charge. And that's another thing that makes Iran such a good target, because they are so nasty, because they are so reactionary, because they're so unpopular. And it becomes a regime we love to hate. Just like Gaddafi and Saddam, you go back, Idi Amin, Ahmadinejad was a perfect guy because he was so crazy, and when he was in power, saying, "Oh my God, this crazy guy is going to do these, he's going to nuke Israel and whatever," even though the president of Iran actually isn't that powerful compared to the Ayatollahs and the military and stuff like that. But when they have reform presidents like they do now, they say, "Oh, they don't really have much power, so whatever." In other words, the U.S. is all. Again, it's the idea, this phenomenon of a third world dictator we love to hate, so we'll feel really righteous, self-righteous, and be able to, for the sake of civilization and the rule of law and democracy, we can do whatever the hell we want, and has an excuse for militarism and intervention. We've seen it before.
Well, speaking of things that we've seen before, because I feel like I'm sitting through the same movie. I just have a fresh box of popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
Help me to understand how the administration plans to manufacture consent, if you will. I mean, all of the major polls show that most Americans, Democrat and Republican and Independent, do not want to be involved in this conflict. And yet, here we are. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has not backed down.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Tucker Carlson, and I've got to ask you about that interview, but let me just hold off on that. You've got Tucker Carlson, you've got Candace Owens, you've got others, you've got Rand Paul. You got Steve Bannon. And you also have people out, you have the American people. And it's looking at the announcement last night, they went right past all of that. And I was wondering if that was part of the back and forth. Because President Trump is going so far. He's going so far away from his people. I think it's politically dangerous.
Well, I think what he's relying on is that a lot of his policies are very unpopular, and he's getting away with it because the Republicans in Congress are a majority, and they they're pretty much letting him get away with it, and the Democrats have been total wimps in many cases. And meanwhile, in terms of mass protests, we're pretty exhausted with fighting for our democracy at home. It's that the ability to mobilize a big anti-war movement here is limited by the fact that we are fighting for our basic civil liberties. We're fighting to save our neighbors from being deported. We're fighting to save the planet from undoing environmental laws and anything to stop climate change. I mean, we got so much on our plates right now. I think Trump is just calculating that, only 16% of the American public agree that we should get involved militarily, but what are they going to do about it? And so really, I think that's and here's the thing, Santita, is that if you look back to the Americans really come out in a really passionate way regarding U.S. military intervention, only if it ends up dragging on and having American casualties. I mean, if you look at the invasion of Iraq, even when it became clear that there were no weapons of mass destruction, because it was quick and easy, supposedly, and we overthrew Saddam, huge majorities supported it initially. They only turned against it when the insurgency grew and more Americans started coming home in body bags, and Bush, with the support of the Republicans and hawkish Democrats, insisted we stay the course and keep on fighting. And I think that and so it kind of goes back to what I was joking about. We can't even manufacture consent anymore. Is that they don't? Is he really doesn't care? What the people think. I mean, this is that he's not seeking. He's not going to be able to be reelected, and he just thinks being the tough guy and somehow things will come through, and his base is going to love him anyway.
How do you see that playing out? I mean, you are a political scientist. Is that even feasible? Do you know how the political winds change on a dime? Mm-hmm. And he's not even in the strongest position right now. I mean, the American people do not want this. I watch Washington Journal every day. Might not watch it live, but at some point I try to catch at least 30 or 40 minutes of the first hour where they open the phone lines, Dr. Zunis. And you know what? Americans are furious. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have no money. SNAP, Social Security, WIC, Medicare, Medicaid on the chopping block. If they try to get a call and to get a question answered about Social Security, they collapse the system so it's not working. You can't get your mail. It's not that the postal workers don't know how to work. The system's been collapsed. I mean, we're watching the oligarchs take the government apart so they can buy it in pieces and privatize everything. And people are really waking up to that, Dr. Zunis.
Oh, yes. And again, I really do think that we are going to get to the breaking point. We are going to have hundreds of thousands of people. We already had several million people on the street this past week, this previous weekend, and that's only going to get bigger. I'm not unless we end up though in a long, drawn out war. This is probably not going to be the issue that necessarily is going to bring people out. But I really like the point that you're making, is making the connection between all the cutbacks here at home and the cost of war, which is huge. And I really think we need to really emphasize the gun versus butter argument, and recognize that we especially with all the tax cuts and everything, we can't afford to get into all these wars.
So Where do you see this going? I mean, it doesn't have to be one scenario that you play out. I mean, because you do the American citizens are going increasingly restless and angry. Um, I see um, I see a lot of fear, and I'm thinking about those 40,000 troops who are in the immediate area. The
Mhm.
USA Today said, "Hey, wait a minute, you got 40,000 problems. What did JC say? I got 99 problems, and she ain't one, or something like that." They've got 40,000 troops there immediately. I mean, right now we're not talking about the troops on the bases that surround Iran and that are in the region. We're talking about
Mhm.
right there. And how to play that out? Because they have family. Uh,
Mhm.
they are looking at the cuts. Look, Dr. Yunus, you have payday loan centers on the edges of these bases. They have no money.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a real it's a real scam on so many levels, and the it there's so many different different variables. It's really, I mean, again, Iran could do the worst case scenario. Would be that Iran does end up attacking our ships, attacking our bases, closing the Strait of Hormuz. Everything's really crazy, and Trump was quite explicit in saying that threatening to basically pulverize Iran if they dared try to strike back, and which of course would escalate things even more. Um, and of course, that even though, like I say, Iran's pretty unpopular in the region, I think there are plenty of Muslims who may not be Shia and may not like the Ayatollahs, who are just seeing yet another Muslim country is being bombed simply for defending itself when it gets attacked, and again, that could increase the radicalization in the region. So again, that's a more scary scenario. Other options could include that there could be pragmatic voices in Iran saying, "Well, this is totally unfair. This is totally wrong." But is this worth turning Tehran into another Gaza?
Mm-hmm.
And they might try to some kind of face saving move where both they and Trump could declare victory, and maybe it won't go out and maybe it won't go out of hand. And even though we can certainly argue till the cows come home that the bombing was unnecessary, because we could have just stuck with the Iran nuclear treaty, or at least allowed the ongoing negotiations to continue, which were broken off when Israel started bombing. Trump's going to declare, "See, I was tough and I resolved the problem," or things like that. So it's just hard for me to predict at this point. But I think what our main job right now is just to point out that the fact that this is indeed totally unnecessary. The nuclear issue could have been resolved peacefully. That this has been an excuse to go to war. This is about advancing hegemony, and that having and of course again, Israel's a very important role here in terms of paving the groundwork for the intervention. A lot of supporters of Israel in the United States have been uh, helpful in supporting the war and neutralizing a lot of the Democrats who might otherwise have spoken up more against it. Uh, and and again, Israel has its, especially the Netanyahu and the right wing, have their reasons for doing this. But again, I'd caution against saying we're doing this for Israel, or that that Bibi somehow forced Trump to do this. I
Mm-hmm.
think that because again, just to go back to one former Secretary of State, he referred to Israel as our unsinkable aircraft carrier. Joe Biden said if it weren't for Israel, we'd have to invent them, because we needed that kind of strategic ally in the region. So again, this is and again, so again, I want to keep going back to the hegemonic theme, because
Mm-hmm.
really that's what it's about. And again, Israel's an important part of that, but they're not the reason for it.
But that's why I want to continue to drill down on what President Biden did say. You know, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it.
Mhm.
What is it that the United States specifically is looking for? We see Britain and the United States join at the hip forever.
Mhm.
and they're at the center of the mischief. And I can't leave France out. I
Mhm.
can't, Germany's a little bit further out on the periphery, but these same players, I mean, so much of what they've been the mischief makers in that area.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And again, but for, and given the initial hostility of Israel's creation, which is understandable, given the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population, everything else, and seeing them as a colonial settler enterprise, of initially almost exclusively European Jews, comparable to the French in Algeria, or the British in Rhodesia. Obviously, there's a lot of resentment, and there were some threats. And so combine some of the genuine insecurities Israel had in its early years, combined with the history of anti-Semitic persecution, they've developed this siege mentality that initially the British and French and then the United States has helped perpetuate. I mean, I've documented a whole bunch of times where even when Palestinians and other Arabs are all ready to make peace, you had the United States saying you can't trust them, they want to destroy you. It's almost like a protection racket in many respects. And I actually wrote an article for Tikkun magazine
Yes.
called "Israel as a Protection Racket." And I look at all these cases where, when there's hopes for peace, the U.S. actually discouraged it because, again, can you imagine that? And if we did have a viable two-state solution, or a binational state, equal rights or whatever, well, the combination of Israeli technology, Palestinian industriousness and Arabian oil wealth could do, how it could transform the region. What would that mean to American arms manufacturers? What would that mean to those who've pursued a divide and rule policy in the region, for years? I mean, this is the same kind of stuff. Like I remember when there was actually really hope for peace right after the Oslo Accords. There was this, I remember this 76 senators, over 3/4 of the Senate wrote a letter saying we have to still give all this money to Israel and buy these weapons. And the only reason they gave in this 2-page letter was that Arab states had increased their arms procurement. And didn't mention in this letter that 80% of those arms are also from the United States. If they wanted to protect Israel, they would call for an arms moratorium, which not only do the Arab countries agree, want, but even Israel agreed to it because they were in those powerful military and they had the only really good domestic arms industry. But the U.S. rejected it, because we wanted, and again, what would it do to the arms industry? I mean, this is the kind of thing we've been looking at, for years, and that's why. And this is interesting, Santita. A lot of people don't know this. As crazy as Bibi's policies have been, towards Iran, and how, with rockets coming down on Tel Aviv and Haifa, even a lot of moderate and liberal Israelis are supporting the war now. The top Israeli strategic analyst, I mean, the think tanks, the defense industry, the high level intelligence people like that, they recognize Iran. They've said Iran's not really that big a threat. We shouldn't. It's not that a problem. We got this. The things are under control. But so it's not an objective strategic assessment. This is about politics. This is about ideology, and this is about basically advancing Western imperialism.
And how long is that going to work?
Not indefinitely, and unfortunately, there are going to be people. I mean, people are going to. I mean, the good news is that if you look at just how younger Americans look at the Middle East and about Israel and Palestine, it's not going to be politically feasible for the United States to continue the kind of policies we've had for the past couple of generations. But it's going to be a while before these younger, more progressive voices become the majority. And in the meantime, how many people are going to die? Because Israel's not going to change its policies unless the U.S. changes its policies. And well, we have this kind of bipartisan imperial mindset and the power of the arms industries, and which is even more powerful in APAC. And this is unfortunately, it's going to take a while.
Well, I mean, they are so powerful, and they're the ones who are making the money here. They're the ones who, no pun intended, they're making a killing.
You bet. I mean, for example, just to give you one example, you hear a lot of people say, why are we giving so much money to Israel? I mean, they have universal health care, they have affordable higher education, they have all these,
Yeah.
good things that we don't have. But the thing is that most Israelis don't see that money. 80% of so-called U.S. aid to Israel goes directly to American arms manufacturers. And I've talked to a top Israeli general, former chief procurement officer of the Israeli Defense Forces. And he said that half the stuff we get from the United States, we don't even need. Is to keep the assembly lines going at, Lockheed Martin and McDonnell Douglas. And, it's that, for when we help make this anti-missile defense system, we as a joint Israeli-American project, we insisted on making it mobile. Israelis didn't need a mobile one because they're a small country. But we want to make it mobile so we could use them, in Iraq and other places where we intervene, even though it ended up costing a bunch of money. In fact, this other Israeli officer told me about, for every $1 of U.S. military aid to Israel, the Israelis have to spend $2 or $3 in personnel training and spare parts. So, again, it's not even necessarily a gift to Israel, but it does give them the firepower they need to slaughter tens of thousands of Palestinians, and along with a hefty number of Lebanese and Syrians and others and Yemenis, and now to launch this war against Iran.
Long term, where do you see Israel? What do you see? Where are they going? And then where's the United States going? Because what we see and what we've been seeing is unsustainable, Dr. Stevens.
Exactly. I mean, that's really important, and that's why for many years you did have, like I say, some of these very top strategic intelligence people in Israel calling for a viable two-state solution, and that's why you have groups like J Street and New Jewish Agenda and groups like that. Americans for Peace Now, there are a number of groups that consider themselves Zionists, consider themselves, pro-Israel, but recognize it's in Israel's self-interest, to end the occupation and stop getting into all these wars. And they're, fair enough, and they have their counterparts in Israel as well. The problem has been twofold. Is that one, the only time the Israelis have sort of said we need to pull back a little bit and compromise some has been when they've gotten pressure from the U.S. and they've gotten virtually no pressure from the U.S. For the past a couple of decades. And Obama came the closest, but even he didn't push that hard, and he was countered by bipartisan supporters of Israel in Congress, and it's gotten and they realize that it'll be far more secure within its internationally recognized borders than defending this archipelago of military outposts and illegal settlements in the West Bank amidst a hostile population. I mean, that's just a very pragmatic argument. This is not about international law or even Palestinian human rights. This is just purely in terms of Israel's self-interest. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that because of the failure of the United States to side with the Israeli left, to side with it more progressive and enlightened, mainstream circles, the settlements have gotten so extensive that the demographics of the West Bank is such that it's hard to imagine a viable contiguous Palestinian mini-state emerging on the West Bank anymore. And so that's gotten a lot of people to sort of, we can't, we need to have a single binational state, one with between the river and the sea, equal rights for both peoples. Now, some people would argue that's the moral thing to do anyway, because they question Zionism itself and the privilege of Jews versus non-Jews and things like that. But in any case, it's something that many people, including myself, who supported a two-state solution for decades, have gotten to the point where it may not be realistic. We need to move less talk about anti-occupation and to one of anti-apartheid, because it's essentially the Israelis have imposed a form of apartheid. And that's what the slogan "River to the Sea" means. Now, a lot of what we've seen both the Biden and Trump administration and bipartisan leaders of Congress saying, "Oh, river to the sea means you want to physically destroy Israel." No, no. If you look at the origins, those actually originally came out of the left-wing secular nationalists in the 1960s. Surveys of student activists and others who use the term, they're talking about a binational state, equal rights for both. Yes, Hamas picked up that slogan as well, but they usurped it. They only adopted it 8 years ago or something like that. And just because Ukrainian fascists use the word Slava Ukraine doesn't mean everybody who says Slava Ukraine along with Ukraine is a fascist. So it's a similar kind of thing with the river to the sea. But again, that's sort of how things are going to have to be eventually. But again, it's going to take a long time. But as the South African slogan was, "No easy walk to freedom."
And before we go, just going forward, because things have moved so quickly. Help us to understand what it is that we need to look for, the questions that we need to be asking. I think we need to, for example, push Congress to push the president to make his case.
Yeah.
Going up, down on war, but we cannot afford to have the subversion of the Constitution in this way.
Yeah, that's critically important. We need to get Congress involved. I've actually been somewhat pleasantly surprised that even Schumer's and Jeffries and some of the other Democrats who were initially supporting Israel's war on Iran have come out and spoken out against Trump for getting the United States involved. I mean, strictly speaking, we should be calling for impeachment. I mean, really, when you look at the Constitution, it's very, very clear about war making. I mean, this in certain ways is the most clearly impeachable offense of the number of impeachable offenses that he's engaged in since coming back to office. But I think getting Congress involved to assert their power, because here's the thing: if a president can act like a king, like a dictator, and run roughshod over U.S. law on foreign policy and international law, that what's stopping him from, even more so than he's been doing so far, step over domestic law. And that if he can get away with this kind of law breaking on an international level, it's just only going to embolden him to engage in greater law breaking here. And if he's prepared to use this incredible amount of violence to get his way, again, we can only think of the possible applications here at home.
Well, we will all be watching, because it's very unsettling what we're seeing, and Iran has been quite forward, as they have said, "America, you will pay for this." Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how that's going to, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like?
Yeah, and here's the thing: even though Iran's been badly damaged there, and even though we won't have troops on the ground like we did in Iraq, having faced counterinsurgencies, armed insurgencies and terrorism, that kind of thing, they have a lot of missiles. They have a lot of missiles. They have a lot of military technologies. They're much more powerful than Iraq was at the time of the invasion. So they can indeed do a lot of damage. And again, they're certainly outgunned by any measure. They'd come out the worst of it. But again, that doesn't mean they can't do a lot of harm to Americans and to others in the process.
Is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
Oh, no, only that, we have seen how popular movements in this country have been able to shift U.S. foreign policy. We got us out of Vietnam. We finally got the U.S. to impose sanctions on apartheid South Africa. We got Reagan to finally agree to the RES plan in Central America. We got most of our troops out of Iraq. We even got freedom for East Timor. So these popular movements can make a difference. And so And unlike some of these cases where the majority initially supported U.S. policy, we already got over what we only a small minority support us getting involved here. So we already have the majority on our side. This is just a matter of mobilization. So I know I've said a number of things that are pretty depressing in this past hour, but I did want to end on a hopeful note and just remind that we do have the power to change things. We do have the power to make a difference, and we need to get to work.
Well, you've not been depressing. I think you're giving us a realistic understanding of what it is that we're looking at. The moment is too important for us not to have as many pieces as we can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, and look, for heaven's sake, you're a Middle Eastern scholar. I mean, so that's why I got you, because I need you to help us to understand what we're looking at, because this is a lot to take in. This is a lot. This is a lot to take in. But you're the man to help us to understand it.
Well, thank you so much for thinking of me and having me on.
Oh, look, I can't wait to have you back under better circumstances. But you know what? I think we're coming into a moment of reckoning. And I think this is, my mother said the lessons are going to come quicker. My mother's 81 years old now. Mm-hmm. And so she said, no, this is not an awful time. She said, don't despair. She said the lessons are coming much more quickly. So here we are. Here we are. We were going to end up here if we didn't stop. Dr. King told us this 60 years ago. Mm-hmm. So now here we are. Mm-hmm. Here we are. Now the question is, where do we go from here? He asked that question too. Chaos or community. So there we have it. Dr. Stevens Eunice, I want to thank you so much for being with us. And hey, everybody, I got another hour. I got another couple hours to go. Let's look at this, everybody. Let's look at this. This is a very, very real big issue. In addition to immigration, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza. That's still happening, everybody. The Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless you, Dr. Stevens Eunice.
Thank you so much. Bless you.
Blessings.